Joe Wright probably has watched a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson movies and doesn't understand why this works. He's trying to do it, but he doesn't understand why it works. And it's funny. It's just funny. I mean, like, Joe Wright's best movie since, like, what, Atonement or something, is probably Darkest Hour. Well, definitely Darkest Hour.
Definitely.
And because of Gary Oldman, not because of him. And, like, there's a scene in Darkest Hour where, like, you know, they've got Winston Churchill walking into a room, and then he goes into an adjacent room and he sits down and he, like, scribbles something real quick, and then he gets up and he walks out and he walks into the room that he came in from previously, and then walks into another room and the camera follows him. And I'm like, uh, why the fuck did he even go into that room? And it's because Joe Wright is like, oh, I really want to do like a PTA or a Quentin Tarantino or a Steven Spielberg type oneer. So I've got the camera movement figured out, but I have no idea what the fuck the character is supposed to do.
Yeah.
I like, so. Hey, Gary, just walk in there and do something so my camera can do something. That's something that Paul Thomas Anderson does well. It's something that Scorsese does well. It's something that Spielberg does better than anybody else. It's something that well, yeah, I'll just leave it at those three. I actually have my fingers out right now at the moment. Kind of people do this really well. Like, just, they know how to block actors, and then they block the actors, and then they block the camera to the actor. And Paul Thomas Anderson is somebody who knows how to just design a scene where the characters are given stuff to do that makes sense, which guides the camera. So you're not watching the camera movement and thinking, ooh, this is a really cool shot that the director came up with. You're watching the actors because they were actually given shit to do that makes sense that they would be doing it at that moment, and the camera is just following them. The camera is just doing what the camera needs to do, and it's doing it as well as it can possibly do it. PTA is somebody who has figured that out, and he's good at it. And there are a lot of directors out there who still haven't figured that shit out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like when we did the Northman, I definitely saw like that Eggers was trying to do some stuff like that too, like a lot of movement, a lot of tracking shots, and it's good. It's good, but it's not there yet. It's not like the like you said. And by the way, Scorsese is okay. He's not as nearly as consistent as, like, as far as camera movement. Like, he
No,
definitely
no.
does a lot of fancy stuff, but I think Paul Thomas Anderson, Spielberg, Tarantino to some degree, but Nolan, Fincher, those are
Yeah.
like the top four. I wouldn't count Tarantino as far as camera movement, but like top four, like the Nolan, Spielberg, Fincher, and Paul Thomas Anderson. I don't think anybody knows how to move a camera. I would put Kubrick in that category, but he didn't do it as much, for
Yeah.
sure. And there's some older directors too that were very good at it, but obviously Hitchcock. But yeah, there's some people that just really know how to move the camera.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there are certain people who have pulled off like oneers that like, I can point to that one shot and be like, holy fuck. Like, there's that shot from episode 3 of the first season of True Detective. I will not try to pronounce the name of the director. It's the same guy who directed the last James Bond movie. But there's a oneer in that episode that I mean, I shit you not, I watched it, and I mean, as a trained eye, got through the entire sequence that was like 6 or 7 minutes, and it was just like I turned to my girlfriend at the time, and I don't think they cut. Like what? What? You know, like yeah. Let's check. Like we rewatched the scene, and like yeah, they didn't cut. It was that fluid, that perfect. It was that well designed. The cinematographer is Adam Archipel, so I can pronounce that guy's name. But I mean, there are people who can pull it off every so often and just do it so well that it just blows your freaking mind. But when it comes to the oneer, Steven Spielberg, as far as I can tell, is the greatest of them all
Yeah.
because he's not self-indulgent. He's not the guy who's like, okay, I'm going to break a record. He's the guy who's gonna be like, okay, well, uh, we're going to hold the shot, and okay, 55 seconds or no, 56 seconds. That's when it works. Cut. We've got another shot. We can move in. And I mean, a 56-second long take is actually relatively long in cinema. A lot of people don't realize that. But Spielberg is the master of it, and I think he'll die the master of it, and I hope he doesn't die for a lot of years. But
I don't know how many more movies he's got in the. It's probably a few more.
yeah.
um, One thing I was gonna say is that I listened to a podcast with Bill Maher was talking to Tarantino, and Bill
I saw
Maher.
that one too.
Oh, I
Oh, you saw
saw
that one?
that.
Think about the 1917, like he's
Yeah.
gushing all over it, and
Yeah.
Tarantino was like, and I think Tarantino has a good point. Like 1917 was a great example of a movie that was obviously on the surface should be insanely impressive, and it was, but you know could the execution of those shots and the decisions about where to place the camera at any point been better? Way better. Like they basically followed the action. There's some good angles there, but it's no Spielberg level of moving the camera or a Paul Thomas Anderson. It's adequate, and they hide the cuts so it looks impressive, but the content that you're getting is wasn't nearly as captivating as you would hope it would be. Because what Spielberg does, and Paul Thomas Anderson too, and is the oneers that have multiple shots within them. You go from the wide to the close up to the this to the that. Like it's all very kinetic, as opposed to just like we're here, we're staying here, we're not going anywhere, type of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but and staging, choreography, like all that stuff is so underappreciated. Like with both Paul Thomas Anderson and Spielberg, like the way the they block the scenes is just like amazing. Yeah.
This is why I think that a lot of people who want to be filmmakers should uh, take some classes in theater, because in theater you don't get a camera where you can just you know move into a close-up. I mean, if you've got a long dialogue scene, you have to be creative and find ways to get people to move around and make it interesting, so people aren't just looking at a stage with like two people talking to each other for 5 minutes. uh it's a good idea to have a sense of staging, in every aspect. I also think that Paul Verhoeven is kind of underrated
Oh yeah,
in this
I
area.
stumbled on like a few minutes
Fantastic.
of RoboCop
Yeah.
yesterday,
I
and
rewatched RoboCop 2 weeks ago.
oh, yeah, 2 days ago it was actually, but yeah, I saw I stumbled onto the scene. It's funny because nowadays, like with streaming, they'll have like live channels, quote unquote,
Uh-huh.
they would call them, because like, oh, this movie's going on, so I'll
Mhm.
click and see what scene it's at. And it was the boardroom scene where they introduced the what's the call, the
Head
fur.
209.
Yeah, the one and the one that shoots the
It's a
Yeah.
one of the
fantastic scene.
executive. Fantastic scene. But the one thing that I never noticed before, obviously, because I saw when I was younger, is like there's like a really long, complicated like take of like the travel the whole boardroom from one person to the other. They switch from one to the other. I'm like, this
Uh-huh.
is like a a sleazy action movie from the 80s. Like this was not necessary. But yes, Verhoeven definitely has those touches of
Yeah.
those oneers from time to time.
It stuck out to me when I was reading the American Cinematographer article on There Will Be Blood way back in the day, which amazingly is uh, what, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. Um, and Robert Elswit was talking about how Paul Thomas Anderson hates grain. He hates film grain. And when you look at the technical specs on Paul Thomas Anderson's films, uh, surely enough, uh, yeah, he never shot anything, uh, any film stock faster than 200 ISO. Yeah.
In case people need to know.
Okay. Uh, until after the Master. He shot the Master in 2012.
Oh, that was also on 70.
Yeah, and that was shot on 70.
So even less grain.
Right. And everything was still shot with 200 ISO film or less. 2012 was the year that Kodak filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. His next film after that was Inherent Vice. And that was the first time that he actually shot 500 ISO film.
It is a pretty grainy movie.
Paul Thomas Anderson has been pretty vocal. I mean, not as vocal as Quentin Tarantino or Christopher Nolan about film, about shooting on film rather than shooting digital. But at the same time, he had been pretty vocal, at least within the industry, of not liking film grain. So up until Kodak filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, he was shooting anamorphic 35 millimeter film, and he wasn't shooting anything faster than 200 ISO stock, which meant that he, I mean, like, he was really pushing light into those fucking scenes. I mean, like, when you look at There Will Be Blood, and like the oil derrick going up in fire and everything like that, and knowing that he was shooting that on 200 ISO stock. If you know anything about photography, that's rough. Like, you're really going full bore of, like, okay, we're just minimizing grain. Then Kodak goes into bankruptcy. Inherent Vice is the first movie that he makes after that. That's the first movie that he shoots on 500 ISO stock. Robert Elswit comes back. He's shooting it. And since then, Paul Thomas Anderson has either served as his own cinematographer or as a co-cinematographer on each of his subsequent films. And each of his subsequent films have used high-speed film stocks with a lot of grain. I'm kind of thinking that that year of 2012 might have been his moment of, like, okay, cost of film went through the roof. I want to make this movie. Inherent Vice wasn't a mega budget movie. It wasn't like The Master. I mean, I don't think The Master was, like, particularly financially successful. Um, so I actually think that he might have gone into Inherent Vice with this feeling of, like, okay, am I going to stick to film or am I going to stick to my hatred for grain? And he stuck with film. and he doubled and tripled down on film ever since then. Because, I mean, that's the only thing that I can connect. Because I mean, I've been listening to everything that he says. I've been reading everything that I can get. Uh, I mean, he's expressed his hatred for film grain. He's said that, you know, like he actually said at one point, you know, comparing himself to Tarantino and Nolan, like those guys are out to like slit throats, and I'm not really in that category, but I love film. I really think that that was his breaking point, where he was just like, I'm just going to commit to film, and screw it if it's grainy. You know, I just love film. I I just love what film gives me as an image. Uh, that's just what I'm finding in terms of his behavior, and uh, I mean, and particularly since he has since started uh, uh, serving as his own cinematographer. I mean, using faster film does make it easier on you. You know, you don't have to. Uh, yeah, you can light scenes more to your eye than you would if you're shooting everything at 200 ISO, and it's supposed to be a dark scene and everything. But that really might have been a transformative moment in his career.
And just to clarify, Matt, what you're essentially saying is that you agree with that decision.
Oh,
That was a very long way of saying
yeah. Well, as somebody who just bought a 4x5 camera, yes.
I think you might be reading a little bit too much into this. I mean, I personally think that for one thing, like after There Will Be Blood, there was a rush of like digital cinema. Like it became very big. I
Yeah.
think it was like 2010 or so where the Alexa came out and stuff. So that's when it became like huge. And and he pushed back against it. So did Tarantino.
Mm.
Both of them shot movies on 70 millimeter, right? I think it was like Hateful Eight, and yeah, and he shot The Master on 70 millimeter because there was this like, oh, you're going digital because you like a sharp image. Well, I'll shoot on 70, and my image will be even sharper than yours. You know, that kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And you know, and Nolan with the IMAX bullshit, whatever. But in any case,
So dismissive.
no, come
Hey,
on, he's just very
I
good.
might be working on Oppenheimer this
Yeah,
summer.
yeah, come on. But at least don't change the
Yeah.
formatting mid-scene. That's like, but
Sure.
in any case, it's just unnecessary. You can get like an image without grain, even with 35. Just yeah, shoot 200 ISO, whatever. But I do think that what happened is that the appeal of digital cameras is that they make life easier and it's easier to light. It just frees you up to be more creative and maybe and not only that, but also I think that he also wants to run the gamut of what film can do. Like what does film can do? Like what he realized, like, yeah, I wanted the sharp image, but then my 70 millimeter movie kind of looks digital because it's such a clean image. But what does film do that digital can't do is look dirty. And especially when he does a lot of period pieces, because he made like Phantom Thread, Inherent Vice, and now he did this. It made sense um, to go grainy and to show the difference between that and what digital movies look like, to differentiate his movies somehow, because the doing the master didn't really do the trick. He tried it out. I'm sure it just was cumbersome and made his life difficult, so he just kind of backtracked and went in the opposite direction. And also he's been doing a lot of music videos, which is where I think he kind of became more and more comfortable shooting his own stuff.
Mm.
And yes, when you're shooting your own stuff and directing, you want to make, I've done that once, more than once even. And
Uh-huh.
you want to make things as easy as possible on you. And one of the ways is, yeah, higher ISO, smaller cameras, and then you work it into the story by, if it's a periodic piece, then you do that. I think Phantom Thread, he did shoot some scenes 200, maybe it was the exteriors, but but yeah, I mean, it's,
Yeah,
that one is
no,
not as grainy as Inherent Vice and Licorice Pizza, but it's still got some grain, yeah, for sure.
no. I mean, I didn't say that he stopped shooting slower films. I'm just saying that he started utilizing faster films.
Yeah, I really
He
think it
yeah.
was like the bounce back from the master. It was like, well, that's what that looks like, but what else can film do that is not like digital? And grain is one of the big things that it's tough to match. Some digital movies can make it look fairly close, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same raw quality to it.
Question.
Yeah. Okay.
Boogie Nights also took place roughly the same time period as
Mhm.
Licorice Pizza. Why does it look better?
Look better? You mean as far as the quality of the image, or?
Sure.
No, I think again, it's just
It's
a
a better
personal
looking movie.
choice. Not necessarily. Well, for one
Oh,
thing, it was, again, he's lighting his own movie here for sure, so it looks different. There he had a cinematographer,
yeah.
but
Well, it was Robert Elswit. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I think he was going for a different type of thing with this movie, which is why maybe he chose to have Robert Elswit on on Inherent Vice, but not this, because he was going for this like very stripped down, raw look. I mean, Phantom Thread is also pretty stripped down. It's slightly more uh, elegant looking than Licorice Pizza, but Licorice Pizza really goes for this, like we said, grainy, like raw, a lot of handheld stuff, like very like feeling of yeah, like loose feeling of in the filmmaking, where Boogie Nights was very much like a kind of like a magnum opus. Like it was doing a lot of like steady cam shots. The quality was just good, like just really good of the image, like a lot of different color usage and lighting. It was still like looked like a 70s type of feel, but it didn't go as extreme as Licorice Pizza. But it was just a decision at the time. He was like a new filmmaker. He probably just wanted to make it look professional. Where here he's got more freedom. He's like, I've done that. What am I gonna just do Boogie Nights again? I'm gonna do something more raw and more like nutty than what Boogie Nights was.
Yeah.
You know,
I, I mean, also just kind of an ultra nerdy take. Given when Boogie Nights came out, that was I think that was in the EXR stock era of Kodak. Uh, so I like this is the thing that drives me nuts. Like, Jason, you remember when we shot Madeline?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I chose the Kodak Vision 1 stock, even though we were already on Kodak Vision 3 for a reason. I mean, like, yeah, the blacks in older Kodak stocks were just glorious. The contrast, and even though we were shooting black and white on the head, I mean, like the color was just different. Like the as film stocks evolved over the course of like our careers, everything was going toward more dynamic range and more kind of pastel colors. Uh, you know, uh, you know, moving more toward digital post production processes, uh, and uh, and obviously Boogie Nights predated all that. So I mean, the film stocks that they had back then were film stocks that were meant to, look gorgeous the moment that you printed them, and you needed to get everything right on set. And it's, I think it's just a different I think that the entire mentality has changed since Boogie Nights. I mean, really, since Oh Brother, Where Art Thou actually kind of changed the entire film industry in that it was the first feature film that was actually finished with a digital intermediate. Since then, both film stocks and digital capture formats have just entirely shifted.